Welcome to the Real Python Podcast. This is episode 219. Are you interested in practicing your Python skills while learning how to solve astrophysics and astronomy problems? Christopher Trudeau is back on the show this week, bringing another batch of PyCoder's weekly articles and projects. Christopher shares a pair of his recent Real Python video courses about exploring astronomy and astrophysics with Python. Throughout the courses, you get to practice using a variety of data science libraries such as NumPy, Matplotlib, pandas, pint, and Astropy. We also speak with Manny Young, who is the organizing committee chair of PyCon Africa. Real Python is excited to be a contributing sponsor of this year's conference. Manny discusses reinvigorating a continent-spanning conference after a multi-year hiatus. He also talks about introducing Python to students and new developers across Africa through PyClubs, PyLadies, and PyData programs. We share several other articles and projects from the Python community, including a news roundup, logging in Python, understanding operator precedence, reconciling why it only works on your machine, a fast way to create an HTML app, and a tool for deep inspection of Python objects. This episode is brought to you by InfluxData. InfluxDB is a purpose-built time series platform for ingesting, storing, and analyzing metrics, events, and logs with sub-second query responses and high interoperability. Start now at influxdata.com. All right, let's get started. The Real Python Podcast is a weekly conversation about using Python in the real world. My name is Christopher Bailey, your host. Each week, we feature interviews with experts in the community and discussions about the topics, articles, and courses found at realpython.com. After the podcast, join us and learn real-world Python skills with a community of experts at realpython.com. Hey, Christopher. Welcome back.
Hey there.
We kind of have a special guest this week. We have Manny Young, who's organizing PyCon Africa with a whole team there. And so I wanted to have him reach out, talk about what's happening there. And so that'll be at the end of the show this week. But we have at least a few of our regular items here. We got some news and topics and projects that I want to dig into. So what do you got for news?
Well, speaking of regular, I think this is a milestone. We have got through an episode without having to say there is a release candidate or a beta of 3.13. There was no 3.13 news this week.
Is that like, we make the sound effect, fwah, fwah, fwah.
Yeah, basically, whatever the opposite of fwah, fwah, fwah is.
It's like, meh, shrug.
Whatever.
Yeah.
So let's start. There are two new PEPs. PEP 750 is tag strings for domain-specific languages, and this is F strings on steroids. The idea is to extend the F string concept into a processable templating language. You define a function known as a tag, and then you prefix your string with the name of that function, the tag name. So the PEP uses an example of greet as the function, and then greet quote templated string. And what happens is with this mechanism, the function gets invoked when the string is processed. And this allows for validation and processing connected to the string being instantiated. So a good example of this is you could use it as an SQL sanitizer and then be able to use like a tag string for SQL parameters. So if you use an F string for SQL, don't do that. You're open to injection attacks. And so all the SQL libraries have other mechanisms for dealing with this so that you're not having the injection problem. So the idea here is with a tag processor, you could have a sanitizer that correctly escapes everything to ensure it doesn't happen. There have actually been a couple of PEPs related to this idea before. They came out a long time ago. They were kind of connected to the F-string space, and they all were, hey, that's an interesting idea, but let's not talk about it now because we don't know if F-strings are going to work. So they basically waited until F-strings have happened, and now it's resurfaced.
They're pretty solid now.
Yeah, F-strings are definitely the way to do things, without a doubt.
Yeah.
There's also some connection here to things like domain-specific languages and things like that. It's an interesting idea. I'm dubious about the syntax for it. I love the idea, but the syntax I find hard to, just the idea that you have words in front of the string. And then, of course, if you accidentally don't know that you can put R in front of a string, then your tag's not going to work. So I wish there was some other way of doing this, but I don't have a suggestion. But the fundamental concept is a solid one.
Yeah, maybe it'll get worked out in discussion as far as the formatting.
Possibly. Yeah, you never know. Yep. And then the second PEP is 752, which is package repository namespaces. This proposes a way to reserve a prefix for package names for an organization. So the intent here is to help with name squatting in PyPI. So for example, if real Python registered our name as a prefix, nobody but associated accounts with real Python would be able to create a package with the real Python prefix. For backward compatibility, existing prefixes will be allowed. It just will be a restriction on new packages. And to avoid the whole domain name style web rush, this is really only being proposed for corporations, large open source projects, universities, governments, and NGOs.
Nice.
So it's interesting, and it does help. Obviously Microsoft and Google and Amazon don't want other people having Microsoft and Google and Amazon as the prefix in their name. And there's, for security reasons, good reasons not to allow that. So this will probably help with that kind of thing.
It sounds like it's been a work in progress. I'm interested in this. I think this might be a good way to approach that.
Yeah, the PEP mentions is a couple different approaches other languages take in this space. And one of them, I can't remember what language it was. One of them uses like modifies the syntax name. So like there's an at in front of the package name. And they decided, let's not add extra character, whatever.
Yeah.
And the only thing it would have solved was the backward compatibility thing. And because really, like, this isn't really a language change. This is a process change on how PyPI will handle packages. So as a result, they can be flexible about it. There's going to be a human being making judgment calls about whether or not, yes, you should be able to have that, or no, you shouldn't, right? So
good.
It really just gives the PyPI folks permission to act reasonably.
Yeah.
And it removes the threat of certain kinds of bad actors in certain kinds of situations, which is good.
Yeah, whole category.
So, yeah. A subset of a category, but
I guess so. Yeah.
You can still typo squat on one of my packages because it won't have a prefix. So,
yeah.
And then the last bit of news is the videos from PyCon US, which was back in May, are now live. So it was a record-breaking attendance for PyCon, and there's lots of good stuff there to check out. And of course, we'll link to that in the show notes, so you can go disappear down a YouTube hole for a few hours, days, weeks, however long it takes to watch all the Python stuff. Yeah.
It's nice to have a recap of what kind of happened at PyCon, so you can read about kind of some of the comings and goings. So cool. I guess that takes us into topics then. I have a real Python one. This is a bit of a trend. We've been doing a bit of updating of older tutorials. Things change in the language and so forth. And this is another one by Philip Exeni. It's called Logging in Python. And it kind of dives you into the fundamentals of how to get into logging and what to do with it. And there's an associated quiz, which is a new trend also. So you can kind of test your knowledge after you've kind of played with it a bit. I might start with some fundamentals here. Like, you probably, if you've been working with Python for a little while, even if you've been going through tutorials, you might have seen a lot of use of the print function to understand, how your program's flowing. And logging is really the next step for you to work with if you want to have something that in practice your program is outputting information to you about what's happening, potential errors or warnings and so forth. And you can really kind of control how noisy you want this thing to be, how verbose. And it's another great tool. It's built into Python, which is really nice. And Philip walks you through multiple examples using the built-in Python REPL. I know we say REPL a lot, and I wonder occasionally if I got a new listener and they don't know what that is. And so it's an abbreviation, and many times we don't clarify. So when you type Python in a terminal or Python 3 into a terminal window, you get that triple, little prompt. And that's where you can sort of experiment and try out Python commands and so forth. The REPL, which is what we're sort of pronouncing as a REPL, is the read, evaluate, print loop. So when you're inside this environment, you type in commands and it reads them and evaluates them, prints them back, gives you the result, good, bad, and so forth. And you sort of loop and keep working through that. So it's a great way to experiment as you're learning. And not only with the fundamentals of Python, which is really where a lot of people start and dive into this thing, but also if you're trying to learn something new, it's a great spot to stop and experiment with things and try things out.
Yeah, even if you're not trying something new, I often have it open when I'm coding because it's like, what is the syntax of that? Or
just like copy and toss it in there.
Yeah, you go and you're like, okay, I think these are the 3 lines I need. Let me prove that works. And then now that I've got it working, now I put it in my code, right? It's that sandbox is almost always open while I'm coding.
That's great. So in this case of logging, he provides some quick advice on it. And as you work through the piece, you can make changes, try things, stretch out and sort of experience stuff. Nothing's going to be permanent. And it's a place, where you can make mistakes safely and experiment with your code. So he starts out, this whole thing is kind of done in the REPL and has you importing the logging library. And you start out with what's called the root logger. And the first thing you kind of dig into is there are levels of logs. I don't want to call them severity. I don't know what the term would be, intensity, but you start in sort of a debugging mode, which is really would be your kind of most verbose level. And then you have an info level, a warning level, an error level, and then a critical level. And these 5 levels that you can adjust to can not only be adjusted by strings with those specific names, but you can also then use a numeric value, and it goes from 10 up to 50. They're in values of 10, 20, 30, and so forth. The article digs into formatting your output, which is very important since that's going to be your main resource there to kind of dive back into. So how much information do you want in it? How little information do you want? Do you want timestamps? How detailed? And you can kind of work through multiple predefined attributes. And then there's links to the Python documentation, and there's a lot of attributes you can kind of choose to play with there. It gets into logging into a file. So not only could you have some kind of live thing, maybe putting stuff back out in the terminal as the thing's running, but you can also have it saved to a file. There's parameters that you use in that particular case, setting your encoding, the different mode, read, write, appending, and so forth. And he gets into some of that stuff there. And then how do you want variables to show up? And do you want to have stack traces if you get into errors or critical things happening inside there? And then he digs into, all right, so that's some of the fundamentals you can kind of play with inside of the REPL. How would you create your own custom version of this thing and how to instantiate it, how to use handlers, adding special formats to your handlers, and then kind of adjusting how your log levels would work inside of a custom logger along with filtering it out. So it's a good tour, how to use it. I might suggest that after you played around with it a little bit, you might have questions like, how do I implement this in my actual code? Then you might check out some other people's code. That's something we always suggest that is a good tour for you, but also digging into the Python docs, which are really thorough and include code examples. I think it's a great resource as far as like a concise article, and those Python docs go much further. They're very, very detailed and give you all those lists of like every parameter and so forth that you can kind of play with. So
this is definitely one of those places where I think people need an article.
Yeah.
The logging is way too complicated. It's done that way because it's compatible with the approach other languages have taken, and it's very, very configurable. But that very, very configurable is very, very daunting if you're just like, I just need some debug statements. Now what do I do? And I can't get it to work.
Yeah.
So I find like there's some places where you're like, oh, I'll just look at the documentation and I'll be fine. And there's other places where it's like, I need someone to help me walk me through this.
Where do I start?
And I find logging is definitely one of those things. So
yeah,
you mentioned the how you can configure for console versus file. You can even change the format of the messages for those to be different.
More verbose, less verbose. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I'll do is, so Django's development server will print out to the console your console debugger versus the file debugger. So one of the things I've done there on occasion is I'll put ANSI escape sequences in the console version so that I get bolding or coloring so that it's easier to pull out like the message part or, the IP address or whatever it is that I want to pop on the screen. But of course, you don't want that crap inside of your output file because then it just looks like line noise. So, and this is what I mean by configurable, right? So you can get down to if I'm outputting here, it's going to look like this. And if I'm outputting there, it's going to look like that. And There's a lot of power to that, but it is also means it's a bit of a stepwise learning curve, right? Like you walk into the wall, you look up 10 feet and go, oh, that's a step. All right, if I can get to the first step, I'll be fine. But you need your climbing gear a little bit.
Yeah. So what's your first one here?
I've got an article by Matthias Richard, and it's called "It Works on My Machine. Why?" This is something I think we've all run into at one time or another, where you hand your code off to someone else or it gets run in production and something ends up being different there. The article is an exhaustive list of the kinds of things that can be different, causing this fun little adventure. The article starts out with a list of the kinds of differences between a working environment and a failing one in no particular order. It includes things like configuration and environment variables. So, for example, are you running with the debug flag on? Or in the database side, you can run into problems where your schema doesn't match the other person's schema, or even the data itself. You've got a record the other person doesn't, or they have something triggering the problem that you don't, all that kind of good stuff. Then there's a whole group of problems that are more or less web-based. So which browser you're using, what cookies are set, how the browser is caching things. All of these things can cause kinds of problems depending on things go. Matthias then covers another half dozen potential causes that, for the sake of brevity, I'll skip right by. And that was just the main list. And then there's 2 more lists after that. So the next section is on code differences. So yesterday I ordered a pizza. Their website isn't bad, but there's this final confirm step that doesn't look like a final confirm step. And every once in a while, I forget to hit that actual button. And I wandered down to pick up my pie, and they told me they hadn't got my order, and what was I talking about? And so I came back up to my apartment, and sure enough, my pizza was still in the shopping cart. So the coding equivalent of this is failing to commit or merge or being on a different branch. When I configure Django, I often have a local file that contains secrets that intentionally are excluded from the repo. And if you forget that config variable or something needs to be updated, right, this is a danger zone when you're going into production. And it's not there. It starts to fail, even though it's working on your machine. And if all those reasons weren't enough, there's one more sort of miscellaneous section that contains trickier things like speed difference. So the difference in CPU speed or network speed between machines might actually hide a race condition, which only gets triggered somewhere else. So your code is fine here, but when it gets a bigger processor, it starts to fall over, or it gets a slower network speed and it starts to fall over. So all in all, a good little article to read and not a bad checklist to keep at hand if you're hunting Heisenbugs.
That's great. So my next one is from Stephen Gruppetta. He has this blog. We've talked about it a couple times, the Python Coding Place. It's about operator precedence. And Stephen's been experimenting using a much more narrative style of teaching. I'll let you know right up front that you're going to need to check it out as far as if this works for you or not. I think it might depend on your experience level. I really like to see a teacher try new ways sort of to express this information to students. And this one definitely goes really deep on that, kind of creating entire scenarios and making it very much of like a narration of a story to kind of walk you through this idea. Stephen used that a lot. I had him on the show and we talked about his book and how he was working with that. I think it's reminds me a lot of the video course that we did recently. We talked about rounding in Python, and you think to yourself, "Oh, sure, I know how this will behave," and you're like, "Wait, what?" And this is another one of those. Operator precedence is something that can kind of bite you if you're not familiar with it and if you're not careful. And so, the idea of operator precedence, math is kind of the simplest one to kind of think of. Like, okay, if you have a row of things going left to right, the normal precedence you might have in your head is simply, well, just do this, then that, as it walks across the screen from left to right. And well, that's not how a computer will work. And so if everything is at the same level, multiplication will happen before subtraction or addition and so forth. And so that's something that you might have to remember those rules in your head. Definitely anybody who's been programming for a while, this is a concept that is familiar to them. But there are things that sometimes you go, okay, wait, what about things like or, these sort of conditional things, and how do they behave? And so he talks about that and takes you through sort of what that experience might be like through a story. And I thought that was kind of cool. He also includes code examples and shows the output. He always does that in a nicely formatted way that's very easy to follow. In the end, talking about operator precedence, and you can kind of dig into this if you want, he does include the links back to the Python docs that show you an actual list of everything that's in there and what precedents they have. I just think in some ways, it's a great place for you if you have questions about that in your own code. Don't write things in a way where you're like having to scratch your head about it. Use parentheses. They're at the top and things will be evaluated, and you'll know that the sort of idea of explicit and organizing things. And so if I'm going to have multiple operations and have to think about that, that's something that I try to practice, especially if you're going to do something with conditional stuff like ands and ors and so forth. So there isn't like a question in your head, well, how's that going to behave? Especially somebody else, you don't want to have them running away to a documentation to like scratch their head, like, again, talking about Heisenbugs, potentially, having to like dig in, like, how did this behave? So
yeah, it makes your code more readable for the next time round because you don't have to memorize which of these happens. It makes it,
yeah. So anyway, I think it's a good resource. Again, written in a very, very narrative style. So thanks, Stephen. What's your next one?
Two. I've got a twofer.
All right.
So there's two new real Python courses. Both are themed around space stuff. And these were jointly created by myself and a new contributor, Giuliano Denuno. So the first one is called Exploring Astrophysics in Python with Pandas and Matplotlib. And the second one is called Using Astropy for Astronomy with Python. Both of these courses are a little different from your typical Learn X with Python type content. They both cover astronomy topics and then use Python to explore the topic. So you don't need to know any astronomy as long as you're, if you're interested in the space stuff. And in fact, I knew very little myself when I started out. So Giuliano's a student in astrophysics. And so he came up with the problem sets and the topics. And then together we sort of coursified them. So both courses use pandas and Matplotlib, and neither really expect you to know anything about these libraries. They aren't quite meant as intros to that topic.
Yeah.
We don't get really deep into the mechanics of pandas, for example, but you do get a sense as to what you can actually do with the library in a real world situation. The first course is divided into 3 sections. The first section covers slingshot gravity assists. So that's the idea of sending a spacecraft to circle a planet in order to get a boost of speed or a change in direction before it's heading off somewhere else.
Think The Martian.
Yes, exactly. And so this section uses a third-party library called Pint that allows you to associate units with your variables. So that way you can have a variable containing, say, kilometers per second as a velocity, and the code will stop you from doing something like adding that to a variable containing temperature, because you shouldn't be able to do that. And screwing up units has destroyed at least 2 spacecraft that I know of. So this is something you want to get right. The second section in this course is on black body radiation, which is a way of measuring the wavelengths of light that come out of stars. And you use Matplotlib to graph the radiation. And in fact, the example used is our own sun. And so you can kind of see why we see the parts of light that we do, because that's the parts of light that primarily come from it. Kind of makes sense. And then the third section's on what's called a Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, which these are charts of stars comparing their brightnesses and their sizes. And in this section, you get to play with real-world data. Giuliano went and found a bunch of star source material, downloaded it for CSV, and then we process that in pandas and then create a graph so that you can see, there's actually patterns. So the bigger the stars the different star sizes and brightnesses tend to cluster together, and the graph really sort of reveals this. So like there's almost nothing at the 6K medium size. If it's 6K, it's going to be big. And so you kind of see patterns.
Yeah.
And these are where these diagrams were actually used. Astronomers started to understand the evolution of stars by looking at these kinds of graphs. The second course also uses pandas and Matplotlib, but it adds a third-party library called Astropy. This library lets you do things like figure out where a star is in the sky from your perspective. And this course has two sections. One is actually that perspective calculation I just mentioned. So it creates a graph that allows you to see the ideal viewing time for a star. And it takes into account, like, is the sun up? Because the sun probably will make it hard to see.
One star overriding another.
Exactly. Where you live and, when it pops up. And of course, it isn't perfect because, if you live in a large city like I do, when you can see the star is never. There's a line in the kids' movie Madagascar that goes something along the lines of, look at all the star. And yeah, downtown sometimes kind of feels like that.
Yeah.
Anyhow, the other part of this course does calculations for conjunctions, and that's when planets line up in the sky. So you go searching for when there'll be a nice little conjunction. So these courses were a blast to write. I learned a whole bunch myself, and I think we've managed to make the content sort of approachable. So if you don't have a lot of background in space stuff, or if you're new to pandas or Matplotlib, then there's some joy in kind of learning these pieces without necessarily deep diving and sort of seeing how scientists can actually use some of this stuff.
Yeah.
We've talked before about coding problems as a way of learning at coding, and I'll never likely code planet conjunctions again, but it's fun to play with something that's actually kind of real world and, that does something rather than just spitting foo bar or whatever out to the screen. So,
yeah, I feel like there's a lot of crossover with people that they have a telescope or they have these other kinds of things and have dabbled here and there. And so this is kind of a neat way without necessarily going to university to kind of get to play with this stuff.
Yeah, and there's some great apps out there. Now that phones have gyroscopes in them and they know where they're being pointed at, you can actually type in, I want to see this star. And it basically is like up, left, hotter, colder, basically points you at where it is, right? So, my wife took an intro to astronomy course when she was in her undergrad, and back then it was look it up in a book and then do all this math and then cross your fingers that you'll be able to do it. And now it's like, I'd like to see Betelgeuse. Oh, that's fine. Here you go. So, yeah.
Nice. Developers love InfluxDB because it excels in real-time performance for time series data, offering sub-second query responses and scalable architecture. It separates storage and compute using cost-effective Apache Parquet files to slash storage costs significantly. Its open architecture allows direct access to data for analytics, business intelligence, and machine learning, eliminating complex ETL needs. Learn more at InfluxData.com. That's INFLUXDATA.com. Well, I think that takes us into projects then. My project, I didn't think about it initially, and then when I just sort of quickly picked it, and then I was like, wow, this is actually really cool and very interesting. It's called Fast HTML. Their subtitle is The Fastest Way to Create an HTML App. And I was like, okay. They've been inspired by Fast API, which I kind of wondered about with the name. I think there'll be some confusion there in what's happening. But yeah, I mean, the whole goal is you want to create something in HTML very quickly. And there have been tools, like we talk a lot about Flask on the show, and we talk a lot about Django on the show, and these frameworks that help you kind of stand these things up. And the idea here is to maybe even do that a little quicker. It's by some usual suspects out there, people that we might have heard of before. Jeremy Howard, he's the creator of FastMail, and he's part of this company or group or organization. I'm still trying to figure out exactly what Fast AI is, but fast.ai is their address. They create a lot of different projects and are definitely involved in kind of trying to make it public, people to be able to play with AI stuff. And so I think this is maybe a way for them to create applications that use AI very quickly and stand them up. There have been tools around that allow you to, I want to make a dashboard, or I want to make a way to sort of share information kind of quickly as an application. And that's definitely the goal they have here. The foundations are built on ASGI, ASGI, HTTP, HTML, obviously, and then HTMX, which we've mentioned a lot on the show also. It's Python that you're writing inside there. It's using a couple other tools, Uvicorn and Starlet and SQLite for data inside of it. It's ready to go. You can deploy one of these applications anywhere that you can basically have Python running on a service out there. So tools like Python Anywhere, which is a neat place where you can experiment with Python to share applications you created, or Replit. I think they said Hugging Face. And there's a couple other ones that are more on the commercial side that if you create something that might expand and get much bigger, you can look at. There are a lot of examples and lots of tutorials. A couple really interesting things, though, I learned as I was kind of digging through this. They don't really use PEP 8. So the coding style is literally fast AI style, and they kind of warn you in advance. So it kind of looks a little strange to definitely somebody who's coming from real Python, who's been learning in the classical style of learning Python. I mean, you mentioned it. You were like, oh, these are definitely going to be functional programming people. I'm like, yep. They have a next description of that and how to kind of get used to it. It is Python. It is valid, but it's definitely not PEP 8. Another interesting thing I found about it when I went to the GitHub repo is that it didn't really have Python anywhere in the language section that you see that sort of percentage meter. It was actually Jupyter Notebooks was like 90-something% of it. And I was like, that's interesting as a language. And as I dug into that, it was in the FAQ that it actually is causing them a bit of problem in the packaging part of it and sort of putting it out there. They can't use PyProject HOML because of the way the notebook sort of format can be sort of saved. So they have to use setup.py. So anyway, something interesting else I kind of learned as I went into that. And the other thing I thought was interesting is just fast.ai. It looks like a good place to learn about not only AI, but just sort of implementing it. They do a lot of tutorials. I was very impressed by the homepage for Fast HTML. It's got a really nice set of examples and code that you can touch and play with and instantly see the results in the page. So there's a lot of examples that do that, where you can have that sort of interactivity that I think is a lot of fun to play with. So if you're interested in the web app space and sharing your code online, this might be another place to check it out.
So you're saying that it's using ASGI and Unicorn, so they've gone down the async path.
Yeah.
Was it clear why, or was it something that they stuck in your face at all that you have to think asynchronous, or was it just sort of a consequence of underlying architecture?
It's not in my face at all.
Okay.
The code isn't necessarily... I didn't see a lot of code that was necessarily pushing you toward that, but I think that might be for the hooks of some of these AI things that they want to do with
whether it was, or its connection to wanting to be able to use the Jupyter Notebook or something. I wondered whether it was one of those pieces. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So the examples really didn't dig much into that, as I saw that, there's like lots of little things like,
so it's not littered with async and awaits kind of thing.
No, not initially. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You can create an app pretty quick with like several pages. They made an entire to-do list kind of thing, and they actually walk you through creating that if you're interested in a few minutes, which is pretty impressive. And that has a lot to do with the HTMX stuff and direct calls with that. Liberal use of decorators also for routing, which reminded me a lot of
the Fast API
Flask
style.
And again, Fast API. Yeah. So they're building on top of these other tools.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. What's your project?
I've got something called WAT, spelt W-A-T, and it's an object inspector. So it's by GitHub user igrek51, and it essentially combines things that you can learn about an object from dir or vars and that kind of good stuff, but prints it out in a fairly easy to read colorized result. So for example, if you run WAT on a string, it tells you the value in the string, the type that it's a string, its length, and then lists all of the public attributes, which for strings is a couple dozen methods, all the things you can do with strings. So to use WAT, you optionally install it. Yeah, I said optionally. I'll come back to that in a second.
Okay.
And then invoke the module with the division operator, which I found is a little odd at first. I think he's trying to aim for things that are just short and quick. And it also avoids the whole from WAT, import WAT thing. You just use the module directly.
Yeah.
So back to my string example. If I were in the REPL, callback, I'd just say WAT/greeting, where greeting's my variable, and then it would do an inspection on greeting and print out the results. So igrek51 has gone to extremes to ensure that this is a quick little snippet kind of library. There are no dependencies. This makes it very small and fast to use. It comes with the consequence, though, that the colorization is all hard-coded. It's that old Ford Motors joke, the Model T comes in any color you want as long as it's black. Well, you better like his color format or you're stuck with his color format. And when I say extremes, I mean extremes. igrek51 provides a compressed base 64 version of the library. So the documentation shows you how to use 3 lines of Python to decode the compressed string and execute it as an import. So granted, one of those 3 lines is 5,000 characters long, but it means you can copy and paste from the docs directly into your REPL and have Watt at your fingertips without pip installing anything. So this was a new one for me. I have not seen this approach before, but it does solve an interesting sort of problem, right? Like I often find, it's like I'm playing with something. It's like, oh, I need the debugger. And my favorite debugger is one that I have to install. And so it's like, all right, there's one more thing littering my virtual env, and there it is. igrek51 is trying to avoid this problem. So Watt also has modifiers, so you can filter what comes out. So for example, watt.shorts just shows the main parts and skips the attributes. Watt.dunder shows hidden dunder methods. Watt.code will actually show you the actual Python, assuming it's a pure Python library. Watt.gray disables the color output. So I guess I lied. You can get 2 color choices, regular and extra crispy. And then, of course, typing Watt on its own outputs the help information, including those modifiers that I just spoke about. So there's nothing in this library you can't get with built-in functions, but there's a beauty to not having to remember which of them you're supposed to call at any given time. And there's a lot of value in a well-formatted response, right? That just sort of wins out to me over lists of lists. The number of times I've used, dir and then gone, oh, right, now I got to write a for loop to pull out the part and filter it. And that's much cleaner here. So it's a neat little way of digging into things.
Yeah, I love these tools. I felt like I went down a rabbit hole last year of like what is happening under the covers and so forth. And I feel like this is yet another tool that gives you another way to look at things.
Well, and I, because I'm older school with my coding and I don't use an IDE, I don't have autocomplete. And most of the time I don't care, but every once in a while it's like, what method is this again? And so this is just an alternative way of, instead of Googling it, then you can just pop it up and it's there. So
I don't know if we mentioned it. There's a little thing at the very bottom of this. I noticed this is references inspired by Rich Inspect.
Yes.
Which is kind of cool. So I think we may have mentioned that before.
Yeah.
So.
I've been noticing there seems to be a trend lately. A lot of the open source libraries that I've come across, like the last couple sentences in the README is almost, if you don't like this, maybe try this one. This is another way of doing it. And which I it's great because I think we're cross-linking to everybody. But, I ran into it. I needed to solve a little problem in the Django admin and I was digging and I'm like, oh, this library gets me like 80% of the way there. And then there's a little thing at the bottom. It's like, well, if you're trying to solve this problem, and I'm like, oh, there's my last 20%. And I don't have to write it myself. It's there. So those kind of little cross references are a great little way of finding stuff.
Don't miss the bottom of these posts.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for bringing all these articles and news and projects this week, Christopher.
Sure. No worries.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Cheers.
This year, RealPython is sponsoring PyCon Africa. We wanted to bring on Manny Young to discuss this year's conference. So here's my conversation with Manny Young about PyCon Africa 2024. Hey, Manny, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you, Chris. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's really cool to talk to you. So we're here to talk about PyCon Africa 2024. That's happening here at the end of September. And mostly to discuss that, hey, it's back on the map because it's been a little while since there's been a PyCon Africa.
Yeah.
What are the reasons that you're bringing it back? What were some of the decisions that went into re-hosting it here and having a PyCon Africa again?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, it's been a while. We had the last PyCon in Africa. I think the first edition happened in 2019.
Yeah.
That was in Accra, Ghana. And I think as of then, the original plan was to have it twice in a location, then move to a new city, just like I think how they do it, or they usually have been doing it in the US. So we were also to host the 2020 version as well. But I think during the 2020, as we all know, the global pandemic happened. So
Yeah.
we ended up using hopping, which meant we went virtual. So I think the team in Ghana actually helped coordinate the online activities on the hopping platform.
That's great.
And I think since then, like everyone would say, COVID happened. So a lot of things went, radio silence for a while. I think behind the scenes, we've actually been trying to revive things, trying to have calls with Marlene, trying to, okay, let's do it this time. So I think we've even had a plan, okay, we're going to have it come back in 2022, 2023. And, it seems everyone is busy. Everyone is trying to,
yeah,
personal life issues and that. So I think we said, okay, fine, we're going to try and have it in 2024. We ended up noticing if we're not careful, we might also ended up being in the position where 2024 might also go by. So like, hey, let's just try and have this. So I think I reached out to Marlene, that was sometime last year. And then we're like, okay, fine, let's try and, bring out new things. So we've ended up finding that this year is going to happen. Regardless, we're just trying to revive things back and, have like, new plan. So I think, we've made some changes with how we planned on running the conference moving forward. And probably, I think I'll talk about that later.
Okay, cool. Back in episode 65, I had Marlene Mogami on the show to discuss her involvement in what I called the international Python community, because she's doing a bit of that with the PSF.
Yeah.
But she was somewhat instrumental in helping do some of the organization for PyCon Africa back in, 2019, and then the virtual 2020.
Yeah.
So I was kind of thinking about it, like what goes into re-energizing a conference in Africa? Like what are the things that have to happen to make that go?
Well, I think for something like that, I think it has to do with more of like, first of all, I'll say it depends on the region in Africa. So I think, that also plays in. But doing something like that involves major factors. So, the sense of how the community is, for example, the engagement. And, in the Western parts, we have this thing where we say, okay, for example, if it falls in a place like in Nigeria, the hype can be there, everybody, hey. So I think for doing that in the Python ecosystem, I think what we tried doing was to see how we could engage the different communities across the continents. I stated previously, we tried to do a little bit of something different. I think last year I was part of a conference where I think, we learn every day. I picked few things that they did. I was like, okay, if we can do this, to see how we can have that representation. So we ended up coming up with something called like the International Organizing Committee, which happens to form from the different Python communities across the continent. So all the different leaders from, let's say, Python Uganda, Python Namibia, Python Nigeria, Python Ghana here, and all the different communities, have a meeting with all of them and be like, okay, we will be like the IOC, International Organizing Committee.
Yeah,
where we get to talk about, because we want the conference to be for Africa. And since if it's going to be for Africa, it has to be for all the different communities across the continent and maybe not just, selected few. So I think we started that this year. I was able to engage most of them. Most of them really happy to come on board, and we started having discussions for the plans. So we have the IOC, which is the International Organizing Committee. Then we then have the Local Organizing Committee, which will be formed of the local community. So, for example, here in Ghana, the LOC is made up of community members who would then be volunteering and be helping with organizing of the conference. So I think something like this is what we try to see how we can revive things back this year, and ensuring that we get voices from every region, all contributing to how things would be. And you keep on learning. I believe in the long term, because it's going to also help with sustainability, because at the end of the day, other communities will get to understand and get a feel of what it takes to host like a PyCon in Africa.
Right.
All of us are also trying to work together to come up with a documentation on how to host a PyCon in Africa.
Yeah.
So since we want to be moving around, maybe by the time it moves from, let's say like now from Accra, Ghana, and it's going to a place like, I think the next session will be in South Africa. We have people from South Africa on the team. They would have a general idea of, what goes into that. And the next country which, it moves to, they would also get an idea. So I think this year we announced not just Accra, but we said, okay, we are having 2024, which like the comeback in Ghana
Yeah.
due
Welcome
to
back.
maybe the previous experiences we've had. Then we're going to then move to South Africa, then move to another country 2026.
Yeah. It sounds like a big part of it would be figuring out the sustainability of it, like through documenting it and having things in place. And there's a lot that goes into it. I've talked to a variety of conference organizers over the years. And so I think about that. How's the talks and conference schedule going for you guys right now?
Yeah, so for now, I think the programs committee they've really worked really hard to come up with the various talk selections. I think for PyCon Africa, we have different tracks, like things like, emerging technology, data, education, community. So trying to also strike a balance with that too as well. So I think you have no control over what people submit. You might find yourself in a situation where if you're not careful, you end up getting a lot of, emerging technologies than even other places. So trying to strike the balance, make sure we have the diverse talks is also something they've really worked on coming up with. So I think hopefully by next week, we're supposed to be releasing more of things like the schedule. Why things have been a little bit slow, just trying to make sure we strike a balance, because you have international speakers who you need to cater for through financial aid, and some discussions are still going on with the finance team and the sponsorship team, which also have influence on that too as well. But I'm positive that by the close of next week, everything should be finalized, because I think the financial team after that reaching out to people, sending out mails and all of that. So we will quite have diverse talks, scientific compute, maybe AI, ML. I know from what I've seen, web development, also the community as well. And I think we also had to strike that balance too with the keynote speakers too as well that will be coming this year. So we have the director, the executive director of the PSF, she'll be here. I think we have Marlene too, and I think also Sam Sigoni, also other people as well that was speaking on different areas. Well, so that will be quite interesting.
Is that Deb you're mentioning from the PSF?
Yeah, Deb. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I had her on the show, I guess, a year and a half ago, whatever, PyCon 2023. Anyway, great. Okay, so some voices that people have heard on here before. That's great.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is we also try to see how we can also cater for the different experience levels, expertise, right?
Yeah.
So beginners, intermediate, and the experts. So for Africa, it's kind of still new. We have a lot of beginners, then maybe the intermediate level. I won't say we have so much experts, but I think we have some. But if you're going percentage wise, there won't be that much compared to the intermediate level and the beginners too as well. So you'd also want a situation where
that's hard to tune. You got to really tune your talks then to make sure that they're of interest and not like flying over everyone's head.
Exactly.
Yeah. This week, I want to shine a spotlight on another Real Python video course. This course focuses on Python dictionaries, which since Python 3.6 have become ordered and now maintain insertion order. But how do you implement that into your own programs, as they aren't inherently like other sequence data types? This course is titled Sorting Dictionaries in Python, Keys, Values, and More. It's based on a tutorial by Ian Curry. And in the video course, previous guest Stephen Gruppetta takes you through reviewing how to use the sorted function, learning how to get dictionary views to iterate over, understanding how dictionaries are cast to lists during sorting, learning how to specify a sort key to sort a dictionary by value, key, or nested attribute, reviewing dictionary comprehensions, and the constructor to rebuild your dictionaries, and considering other alternative data structures for your key value data. If you're wanting to learn more about Python dictionaries and how to organize your data, I think this course will be a worthy investment of your time. Real Python video courses are broken into easily consumable sections, and, where needed, include code examples for the techniques shown. All lessons have a transcript, including closed captions. Check out the video course. You can find a link in the show notes, or you can find it using the search tool on realpython.com. How did you get involved? It sounds like you know a lot of the players here, but how did you get involved in organizing a conference like this?
Yeah, so I think everything started with we kicking off the community in Ghana. So I was part of the founders of Python Ghana, which I think we started things off, 2017, 2018. I think officially kicked off in 2018 with PyCon Ghana. And I think that was where we got to meet, people like Daniele from, I think then he was with Divio, but I think now he's with the Ubuntu group. Marlin also really was instrumental in even setting up, where we're trying to set up the community over here in Ghana. So I was part of, we called it the Django Girls movement. So I and some friends, we were part of the coaches moving Django Girls from one city to the other.
Sure.
And I think then when we started and we ended up seeing the interest, we then said, okay, we are actually growing and how we need to have a community around this. So I think that was when I think I even reached out to PyLadies to see how we can start, PyLadies Ghana, and the whole community structure now came up. We'll be like, okay, we're going to have PyLadies Ghana. We're going to have PyData Ghana. We had also our initiatives that we're trying to have. And I think I'll speak about like PyClubs, which is something we've started fully now, where we're trying to have clubs in various tertiary institutions, where students can get to meet together to, keep on learning about Python and things like that. So we have PyClubs, and we also had PyScholars as well. So we had these 4 different initiatives. Then we then have the various user groups around the country. So then I reached out to most of the coaches who were doing the Django Girls to, let them understand what we're trying to do. This is our vision.
Yeah.
So, okay, can you start off the user group in Accra? We had people who were like, okay, go to start. Okay, can you start off the user group in Ho? We had people who were like, okay, here we can do that. Okay, can you start off the user group in Cape Coast, in Kumasi? So that was how we then started and, having events or whatnot. But I think from then to now I would say we have come up with more of like a structure to make sure that, hey, everything is running smoothly. And we ended up becoming one of the active communities then. So when even we were to start PyCon Africa, we're on the short list of the, countries that should host it. And I think we were given the responsibility to host PyCon Africa in 2019. And, as the person who was leading everything, we actively got involved. I happen to be someone who is multi-talented, multi-skilled. So graphic design, videography, a lot of things. I took up the multiple hats and, just doing a lot of things, working hand in hand with Marlin and also Daniele. We were able to achieve a great conference then in 2019. And like I said, 2020, we had the pandemic. So I also helped out with the Hopin platform. Then this year we are back to Accra. That wasn't the plan though, but it ended up still coming back to us because we were trying to move to another city on the continent. But after various meetings we had on the IOC, and since we wanted to have like a comeback, we wanted to come back to a community that I would say have the experience, since other communities were already planning their own local conferences, because like, Uganda, Nigeria, South Africa, and Namibia already had theirs. So we're like, fine, we'll come back to Ghana, but we're going to plan for the future. So we announced this year, next year, and also 2026 too as well. So
that's cool.
I would say I got involved. Yeah, I got involved basically with the community organizing based on, having things been running here in Ghana.
Yeah, that PyClubs thing sounds really interesting. So you're saying that's in like the universities there?
Yeah.
Is it in other sort of education institutions?
Yeah.
Is it mostly university level?
Yeah, at the university level, basically. When there was a time the PSF had a call for this education stuff, I think then when Eva was the director, we sent our proposals and trying to have that discussion that, okay, we have this idea of having this initiative in our community.
Yeah.
And we've seen that also in other different groups, because I know, for example, the Google Developer Students Clubs have something similar. And, here in Africa, because I even studied in computer science, we were not using languages like Python. And I would say I was advocating for that even then in school, asking our lecturers, why don't we use Python rather to teach, why we using these languages that, PHP and, C, and which I don't have anything against using that, but
sure,
maybe I have interest in doing data, right? I wanted to make use of a language that I could use then. And we started going for things like that. And I think some of the lecturers were really excited and like, they even want to teach Python. But, putting such things in the curriculum would not be that easy. But I think there were some departments that actually were looking into making use of Python, like the mathematical departments.
Yeah.
and also some of those other departments that are using Python. So I would say,
yeah, a lot of science stuff, right?
yeah. I would say we had a success story. So when we, pitched that to the PSF, we said we're going to have like a pilot phase, where we'll just try it out with some universities in the country to maybe come up with the maps and those learning process and all that.
Yeah.
So I think we had a Catholic university in Siani where they had these active PyClubs, and something happened where I think the testimony that came back was it seems that the vice chancellor of the university was moving around, and he noticed that late he saw some group of students learning somewhere. And he came there to ask, what are people studying like this? And they told him, oh, it's the club, Python club, where they are learning how to use the Python programming language. And the word Python, as an African would like Python, what is that?
Right.
So they tried to explain it to him, and he was like, do you guys, like, is this in your curriculum? And we're like, no, it's not in their curriculum. But he was like, you guys are, like, the number here is quite a lot. What is the interest in this? And we're like, oh, it's a new programming language that, it's cut across different sectors, different industries. And he was like, oh, he's really interested in this. So he told them that he would like to have a discussion with the community. So I think our chair, Mr. Aaron, he went over there. They had a discussion, and he said that he would want them to include the Python in the students' curriculum since they have that interest. So that became like a success story. And these are things that we were like really excited about. So now currently, I would say most of the universities are now teaching Python, and not wanting to just restrict it to these departments that would teach Python. There might be people who maybe are studying in the agriculture sector that want to learn Python.
Sure.
So why not we then have like something like a club where these various students can come together, maybe in KNUST, for example. I'm coming from a university in Kumasi. You have students come together bi-weekly. They learn something new, give themselves, tasks, give themselves projects. They go back, they come and meet, just to have that growth. And we have this roadmap on how, we're trying to have this leap of, you starting up this year. Next year, you get the opportunity to mentor those who are also coming new, the new set, just having this kind of mentorship mindset, and having this setting too, where you give them opportunity to also come and talk about what you're learning during our PyCons. And in that way, you're not just training future mentors, you're also training future speakers. And I think the whole idea was just really exciting with also other community leaders, and they also wanted to incorporate it in their community. And for us, we have this roadmap, and if I should talk about that, the whole idea would be, for example, I will use myself as a use case.
Sure.
I started learning programming at a very young age. So if, for example, maybe I was in high school, that is what I'm talking about. Or if I was in high school, maybe I had something like PyScholars in my high school, where we get to know a little bit about what Python is, what it can be done with. Then maybe I graduate from high school, and maybe I go to the tertiary institution. I then also get to meet PyClubs on campus, where I still get to meet, Pythonistas on campus. We keep on learning, maybe working on side projects that can even have benefits to our universities. Then after I leave the tertiary institution with the PyClubs, we then have the user group in our locality. So we have this map of growth, right, from high school to the tertiary institution. And when you're down,
there's always a landing spot for you.
Exactly. You get to meet a local university. Then we then have the national community. So that was something we're looking at. And it's also going to then help the user groups, which are the local groups where, for example, if we have the Python Accra user group, right, it's the user group in Accra, then you then get like 5 universities in Accra, for example, that all have PyClubs there. These universities end up becoming members of the Python Accra user group. And, you have that membership from these various universities. When you want to have a meetup, you have people who come in. So it's quite something we've really planned out, and we're trying to open it up. So we've been working on our site. We've been trying to work on documentation. I think I had a talk recently in Nigeria, PyCon Nigeria. I also spoke about it in Dubai last year.
Okay.
And a lot of people want to start having something like that.
About these types of programs across.
So we are now coming up with that structure and how to, work together with these various user groups around. So that it won't just be, it's your own personal thing, but no, we are working with the community to have this in their locality. I
was thinking about that. Like, I was wondering what are the types of industries that maybe you could speak about Ghana specifically, but that you see Python being used in. You mentioned data and a couple other things there.
Yeah.
But are there other like sort of emerging things that you're seeing it being used?
Yeah, I think so. For Ghana, for example, Python is actually now becoming a thing because data basically, right?
Yeah.
Data, those in data science, the data analytics and all that. So in as much as some of the startups or the companies might not even be using Python like as a primary language they might be using, they still have people who use Python, to clean their data, or maybe the libraries on the Python to do other things. So, we have the banking sector. We also have the academic aspects too, where, some of the researchers also use Python because we've come across some of these groups. So I think it's gradually growing, because I think there was a time over here when you mentioned Python, most of the developers don't really look at that. They were more of like, PHP and the other web and other languages as well. But
okay,
I think with a movement like, let's say, PyClubs, when you're catching, they say the youths are the leaders of tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. They're going to bring it with them.
Exactly. You're going to bring it with them. So when they are maybe trying to have their startups in the future, probably, Python comes in. And I think, something like that would actually work. But I think it's actually growing. Most of the industries are now making use of it locally here in Ghana, I think, in specific maybe areas in the company.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
One of the things I was wondering about was if someone was wanting to help you guys and sponsor the conference in ways, what are channels that you have for people to reach out to you to help sponsor the development for PyCon Africa?
Yeah, so for PyCon Africa, I think we have the financial team, the sponsorship team. On the website, I think we have the sponsors tab where you get to have an idea of the different tiers that we have. I think another way is you can pick up maybe the one that you think you can help us with, because we are more of like really flexible. In case maybe even you want something for yourself, you can also reach out to the team.
Yeah.
Also, another way we also use in getting help, especially with the tickets pricing, is we have what we call sharing tickets, which is more of like if you want to buy tickets for people to attend the conference, you can buy as many as you want. Hey, okay, I want to buy for 10 people. I want to buy for 15 people. Then I think that way we then maybe give out the tickets to people who in the mails asking for a way of getting tickets and all of that. So I think these are ways now I think we can use. People have also asked on how they can donate. I think during our next meeting, we're going to have that discussion, because I think previously we've had things like GoFundMe and all of that, but we're going to have that discussion on maybe a channel where people who would want to donate to the conference can use in donating to the conference. But I think for now, these are the various ways I think you can help supporting the conference.
I don't know if you want to talk about like plans for like attendance and things like that. We were talking before we started about travel and accommodations and things like that.
Yeah.
It's something that's going to be growing over the years here.
Yeah, growing. And funny enough, I think traveling within Africa is more expensive than even traveling out of Africa to the West.
Okay.
Yeah, because a typical example now is, I would say, you might have people who submitted financial aid from India coming to the conference, and you end up seeing that the fare for the travel is a little bit lower than the person who is requesting from within Africa. So, that is where a lot of the sponsorship really helps out with, and
kind of balance it out somewhat.
Exactly. Because if you have a lot of funds, you can then have more representation from across Africa. I believe as we move along the way, I think we'll end up growing well, and also having maybe the capability to fund such things.
Yeah. More paths available.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, I think we've had this question of people, asking, okay, why don't the local organizations help out? And, it now comes back to what we're talking about previously. Some of them don't use Python. Basically, they may not see the need why we should support a conference. But maybe in the future, when we have more people who have startups, who have companies who understand why they need to support Python, then you can have a lot of local groups supporting. But notwithstanding, we already have some companies who are really helping out. Like, for example, we have a company in Ghana who is supporting the conference.
Okay.
Because, like I said, they have an idea of what Python is, right? So,
yeah.
So I think that also comes into play. And another thing that would help to would be how also maybe the local user groups can engage the industry. So advocating, meeting some of the businesses and having that dealings with them, and that will also help too as well. So majority of the time we end up falling back to the international organizations, and some of them have really been of a great help, which I even will be sponsoring us this year too. So
that's great.
Yeah, it's just to have maybe that growth, and maybe when they see what is happening on the continent, because Africa have, the youngest population. So if we can all push and learn this, I believe in the future we would have a lot of talents and a lot of skills here, and Python will become a household name. Yeah.
Lots to share there. Do you have a specific call to action?
I think for now, I would just say, well, those who are really interested in attending the conference can maybe hop in and try and maybe buy. We know it's kind of last minute, but I think, there's some people who can just, take that decision that, hey, I want to go to PyCon Africa this year. So I think, our tickets are up. You can reach out in case maybe you need anything like maybe visa invitation and all that. We'll get it available for you. So I think what I would just say is, you've welcoming everyone who are interested to come to the conference. We would be really excited to welcome you and have a great time together.
That's awesome. Well, Manny, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's really great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. I think it's really been fun being here. And this is something new to me. So I'm gradually, I've been always behind the scenes. So I'm gradually now, coming up.
And you got to be the face and the voice.
Which is all new, but it was really nice being here.
Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
And don't forget, for your time series needs, use InfluxDB. It's trusted by leading companies for its scalability, real-time performance, and easy integration with modern data stacks. Start for free at InfluxData.com. I want to thank Christopher Trudeau and Manny Young for coming on the show this week. And I want to thank you for listening to the Real Python podcast. Make sure that you click that follow button in your podcast player. And if you see a subscribe button somewhere, remember that the Real Python podcast is free. If you like the show, please leave us a review. You can find show notes with links to all the topics we spoke about inside your podcast player or at realpython.com/podcast. And while you're there, you can leave us a question or a topic idea. I've been your host, Christopher Bailey, and look forward to talking to you soon.